I was born in Arlington, Virginia, in the US, pero he vivido en San Salvador, Quito y la Ciudad de México. والآن أسكن في عمان. Whenever someone asks me about my life, I have the ability to sum it up in almost 3 languages. These languages, the product of the places I found myself at home. You see, my childhood consisted of babysitting 3 siblings as my parents dragged 12 suitcases through airport security, of relearning Spanish each and every time I moved because of small little dialectical changes. As a child, I'd have friends whose birthday parties I'd be invited to religiously year after year after year until June, when I'd never see them again. These friends were replaced with new ones in new communities, new schools, new countries, and this change became my life. My mother calls my sisters and I third culture kids, TCKs. There are many definitions as to what this really entails, but the simplest one, proposed by Ruth Yusim in the 1950s, refers to someone who spends their formative years outside their home culture. Think of people like Barack Obama, raised in the US, Kenya, and Indonesia. People like Isabel Allende or Freddie Mercury, and countless others, both celebrity and not, who have experienced the same type of multicultural identity. The TCK population itself has risen exponentially over the past couple of years with the rise of globalization and ease of travel. And yet, there continues to be a gap between society's privileging of traditional rooted identities compared to the fluid, borderless ones of TCKs, despite the increasing percentage of the population we continue to make up. Because of my moves, I'm often asked, where are you from? And while this question is and always will be fair, it so often sets off a little bit of an internal panic attack. So I was born in the US, raised in Latin America, went to high school in Jordan, but do you want to know where I'm most connected to? Where I've spent the longest? What other people associate me with? The repeated use of this question so often turns it into a sort of quest for so many TCKs, and we convince ourselves that if we're able to find a small, concise little answer, our lives will suddenly become simpler. People often assume that TCKs are those immersed in one culture, but with true roots in another. So we explain it to people, and they assume this whole other identity that exists on some other part of the world. But I'm American, and I've never had the same experiences and values that are supposed to make me so. The New York Times dialect quiz will tell me my Latin upbringing makes me from Miami. I've never been. I learned the 50 states at 15 years old. My cousins knew the capitals by the 1st grade. And the first and only time I ever met Santa Claus was when he flew down from a helicopter, not at my local Macy's. So the question becomes, where do I fit in if my memories don't match those of everyone else's? People so often refer to third culture kids as people defined solely by their beginnings, but this fails to reference this liminal space that so many of us are truly present in. That same liminal space is present for you too, in your online identity. Your algorithm will generate thousands of creators from thousands of cultures every single day. And your feed is a mishmash of all of that content that you consume. So I want you to think of this online identity that you probably already have as akin to this liminal culture that I'm describing. Now, define it. In those few seconds, most of you probably weren't able to come up with a definition that comprises your entire online identity, and that's okay. But the reason I bring this up is because I think it gives you just a glimpse into that cultural struggle third culture kids face every single day. Not just when asked with explicit questions like, where are you from, but rather in that feeling of other that comes when we enter any room, like when I'm introduced as the cultural ambassador of a place I've hardly ever lived in. These differences between you and I, they seem so incredibly insignificant in the moment, but these are what define us in that search for identity. Above me is a collection of memes from the account @ForeignServiceMemes that describes the intersection between community and identity in the same thing. And while this account is clearly somewhat unscientific and not particularly reliable, what it does do is create its own little subculture. Even more than that, it's its own cultural enclave. One made up of a group of teenagers who never have, and frankly never will, know each other, but who all still share the same exact experience is with attempting to fit into the world around them. And this account is proof of that liminal identity. The definition of a TCK has and will continue to change as we globalize. In 50 years, it could refer to something completely different than it does now. But for now, it is so increasingly important that we hold on to the identities that we have, because it is embracing that identity struggle that leads to more authenticity. I'm not here to argue that we simply need more cultural empathy for TCKs, though in many respects we do. But rather, what if we took that sense of struggle and liminality and fluidity and we made that the norm? As TCKs, we have this incredible power to bridge that gap between the expected monosyllabic cultural identity and this list of places and cultures that make us who we are. And as the world changes, understanding those experiences becomes paramount for fostering cultural empathy and understanding in the world. Even down to our core as human beings, we will continue to search for concrete answers in a world that isn't itself concrete. So why do we keep trying to fit our entire identities into boxes?